The neighborhood of Willow Creek prided itself on being quiet, well-manicured, and orderly. Lawns were trimmed to regulation height, hedges lined the sidewalks in perfect symmetry, and every mailbox stood painted in matching colors. At first glance, it looked like the kind of community people dreamed of moving into, a peaceful little slice of suburbia. But beneath the picture-perfect appearance, tension often brewed. Much of that tension stemmed from one woman, Karen Whitfield, the president of the Homeowners Association. With her clipboard, endless lists of rules, and sharp tongue, Karen enforced the HOA bylaws as though she were the commander of a private army. For Karen, power came in the form of fines, notices, and lectures. For the families of Willow Creek, she was both feared and loathed. One family, however, hadn't anticipated how far Karen would go. The Treehouse. 9-year-old Ethan Miller was like most boys his age, full of energy, imagination, and a love for adventure. His father, Daniel, had spent weekends building something special for him, a sturdy wooden treehouse in the big oak that stood in their backyard. It wasn't just a few boards nailed together. Daniel had put real effort into it. He crafted a small balcony, painted the walls, and even helped Ethan hang a little flag on top. For Ethan, the treehouse was a castle, a fort, and a spaceship, all rolled into one. "Dad, it's perfect," Ethan had exclaimed the first day he climbed up the rope ladder. "It's like my own world up here." Daniel had smiled, feeling proud. Every kid deserves a place where they can dream. Neighbors passing by had admired the craftsmanship, and some even mentioned that their kids would love to play in something like it. But admiration wasn't universal. Karen had noticed too, and unlike everyone else, she wasn't impressed. Karen's obsession with rules. The very next day, Daniel found a neatly folded piece of paper taped to his front door. Notice of violation. Section 4.1, Unauthorized structures. Treehouses and similar constructions are strictly prohibited within Willow Creek HOA jurisdiction. At the bottom, in bold red ink, Karen had written, "Immediate removal required." Daniel frowned as he read it. His wife, Claire, came to the door holding a cup of coffee. "Another one," she sighed. "What is it this time?" "She's saying the treehouse has to go," Daniel muttered, shaking his head. Claire rolled her eyes. "Of course. Heaven forbid a child has a place to play." Daniel decided to confront Karen politely. Maybe if he explained that the treehouse was safe, neatly built, and only in their backyard, she might relent. After all, it wasn't visible from the street unless you craned your neck. But Karen wasn't the type to listen. The first confrontation. Daniel walked over to Karen's house later that afternoon. She was outside clipping roses, her sun hat perched on her head like a crown. "Karen, can we talk about the notice?" he asked, holding up the paper. Karen didn't look up from her roses. "There's nothing to talk about, Daniel. The bylaws are clear. Unauthorized structures are not permitted." "It's just a treehouse for Ethan," Daniel said patiently. "It's safe, it's not bothering anyone." Karen snapped her pruning shears shut with a sharp click. "Rules are rules. If we make an exception for you, then every family will want to build something. Before you know it, there'll be sheds, trampolines, and unsightly junk everywhere. We must maintain uniformity." "Uniformity?" Daniel repeated incredulously. "This is a child's playhouse, not a junkyard." Karen turned then, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not going to debate with you. You have 7 days to remove it, or the HOA will take action." Daniel clenched his jaw. He wanted to argue further, but he knew it was pointless. When he told Ethan that night, the boy's face fell. "But Dad, why? I didn't do anything wrong." Daniel hugged his son. "You didn't, buddy. Don't worry. We're not tearing it down. Not yet. Karen's growing resentment. As the days passed, Karen grew more agitated that the treehouse still stood. She filed reports, called emergency HOA meetings, and even knocked on neighbors' doors to complain about the eyesore. Most neighbors shrugged her off. Some even rolled their eyes. "It's just a treehouse, Karen," one mother told her. "My kids think it's amazing." That only fueled Karen's anger. To her, every dismissive shrug was proof that Daniel was undermining her authority. And Karen couldn't tolerate being defied. Ethan's joy and Karen's envy. Ethan spent every free moment in the treehouse. He invited friends from the block over, and soon laughter and chatter echoed from the branches. They held secret meetings, pretended to be explorers, and even camped out one summer night under the stars. For Ethan, it was the best summer of his life. For Karen, it was unbearable. Every giggle and shout she heard from that treehouse was a reminder that her rules were being ignored. One evening, Karen stood at her kitchen window, glaring at the silhouette of the treehouse in the fading light. Her husband, George, noticed. "Karen, it's just kids playing," he said softly. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not just kids. It's defiance. If I don't put a stop to it, I lose control of this community." George sighed but didn't argue. He'd long learned it was futile. The storm brewing. By the end of the week, Karen had had enough. She filed a formal complaint with the county zoning office, but it went nowhere. The inspector declared the treehouse harmless since it was on private property and met basic safety guidelines. That was the breaking point for Karen. If the system wouldn't back her up, she decided she would take matters into her own hands. And in her mind, that meant one thing: the treehouse had to go, by force if necessary. What no one could have predicted was just how far Karen would go, and the devastating consequences of her decision. The weekend arrived, and with it, the sound of laughter drifting from the Miller backyard. Ethan and two of his friends had gathered in the treehouse, spreading comic books and juice boxes across the little wooden floor. Their giggles and chatter carried into the neighborhood, a simple, innocent soundtrack of childhood. But not everyone appreciated it. From her window across the street, Karen Whitfield stood like a hawk on watch. Her eyes didn't blink, her jaw tightened, and her hand tapped rhythmically against the glass. She could hear the children's laughter, and to her, it wasn't laughter at all. It was mockery. Defiance, she muttered under her breath. Pure defiance. Her husband George, sitting on the couch with his newspaper, didn't bother to look up. "Karen, it's just kids having fun. Leave it alone." But Karen couldn't. She felt the weight of the clipboard that always rested on her kitchen counter. For her, rules weren't just guidelines. They were the framework that held Willow Creek together. And if one family could ignore them without consequences, then the entire system would collapse. Or at least, that's how she saw it. The second notice. On Monday morning, Daniel opened his mailbox to find another letter. This one was harsher, typed in bold, with the HOA seal at the top. Final warning. Failure to remove the unauthorized structure will result in punitive action by the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. At the bottom, in Karen's distinctive handwriting, she had scrawled, "You leave me no choice." Daniel sighed heavily as he read it. "She's not going to stop," he muttered. Claire took the letter from him and frowned. "We should call a lawyer." "Maybe," Daniel said, running a hand through his hair. "But it's just a treehouse. I didn't think it would come to this." Little did he know, Karen wasn't waiting for lawyers. She was already plotting her next move. Karen's late-night stroll. The following night, neighbors noticed Karen wandering the street after dark, flashlight in hand. Some assumed she was simply out for a walk, but those who paid attention saw her stop at the miller's oak tree, shining the beam upward at the treehouse. She circled it like a predator, muttering to herself. One neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, leaned over his fence and called out, "Evening, Karen. Everything all right?" Karen straightened and forced a smile. "Oh yes, just checking for safety hazards." But when she turned away, her eyes flashed with determination. In her garage sat a set of tools, an axe, a hammer, and a bright orange chainsaw. Ethan's big day. That Saturday, Ethan had invited his best friend Ryan for a sleepover in the treehouse. The boys had gathered sleeping bags, flashlights, and a bag of marshmallows. They were buzzing with excitement, planning to tell ghost stories and watch the stars through the little balcony Daniel had built. Daniel looked up at them as they climbed into the treehouse. "Be careful up there, and no jumping around." "Got it. Got it, Dad." Ethan called down with a grin. Claire kissed her son on the forehead. "Have fun, sweetheart." From across the street, Karen stood in her driveway, arms crossed, glaring at the scene. The midnight attack. The neighborhood was silent under the blanket of midnight. Crickets chirped, a dog barked in the distance, and the warm glow of porch lights dotted the street. But then came a new sound, low, mechanical, menacing. BRM. The roar of a chainsaw. Karen had waited until the Miller household lights went out. Dressed in dark clothes, she crossed the street with the chainsaw in hand, her face twisted in grim resolve. The oak tree loomed in front of her, sturdy and proud, supporting the treehouse like a guardian. But Karen didn't see strength, she saw rebellion. With a deep breath, she yanked the starter cord. The machine roared to life, its blade glinting under the moonlight. Inside the treehouse, Ethan stirred. "What's that noise?" he whispered to Ryan. Ryan rubbed his eyes. "Sounds like a lawnmower." But as the vibrations grew louder, Ethan crawled to the balcony and peeked out. His eyes widened in horror. "It's Mrs. Whitfield. She's cutting the tree." Chaos in the dark. "Stop. What are you doing?" Ethan screamed, his small voice breaking the night. Karen didn't stop. The chainsaw bit into the thick bark, sending chips of wood flying. Her arms strained, her face twisted with determination. The boys scrambled, panicked. Ryan shouted, "We have to get down," but Ethan was frozen, tears welling in his eyes. Lights flicked on across the street. Mr. Jenkins stumbled out of his house in his robe, shouting, "Karen! What the hell are you doing?" But the chainsaw drowned him out. The cut deepened. The mighty oak groaned under the assault. Daniel and Claire burst out of their back door, hearts racing as they heard their son's cries. "Ethan!" Claire screamed. "Get out of there!" Daniel charged across the yard toward the tree, but before he could reach the ladder, there was a sickening crack. The chainsaw had done its job. The collapse. The tree shuddered violently. Ethan and Ryan clung to each other, screaming in terror. With a thunderous roar, the branch supporting the treehouse gave way. Wood splintered, nails popped, and the entire structure tilted. "Jump, Ethan!" Daniel shouted desperately. But it was too late. The treehouse crashed downward, slamming into the ground with a bone-rattling thud. Dust and splinters filled the air. Claire shrieked. Neighbors gasped. The sound of crying pierced the silence. Daniel dropped to his knees beside the wreckage, frantically pulling boards away. "Ethan! Ryan!" Ethan was conscious but crying, his leg twisted unnaturally. Ryan was shaken but managed to crawl out, his arm scraped and bleeding. Claire sobbed, holding her son's hand as he whimpered in pain. Karen's reaction. Karen stood there, the chainsaw still in her hands, breathing heavily. For a brief moment, she looked satisfied, as if she had finally won. But then the reality of the scene hit her. A child was injured. Neighbors were screaming. Someone shouted, "Call 911." Mr. Jenkins stormed up to her, fury blazing in his eyes. "Are you insane, Karen? You could have killed them." Karen stammered, I was just enforcing the rules. It's against the bylaws. It had to come down." But her words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. And Karen suddenly realized, this wasn't an HOA dispute anymore. This was a crime. The wail of sirens shattered the night. Red and blue lights painted the quiet cul-de-sac in frantic color, as two sheriff's cruisers and an ambulance screeched to a stop outside the Miller home. Deputies jumped out first, scanning the scene with wide eyes. They saw the broken treehouse scattered across the lawn, Ethan lying on the ground with his parents hovering over him, and, most striking of all, Karen Whitfield still clutching a running chainsaw. "Drop the saw," one deputy barked, drawing his sidearm. Karen flinched, her hands trembling as the chainsaw sputtered. I didn't mean to." "Now," the deputy shouted again. With a gasp, Karen let the chainsaw fall into the grass. The deputy kicked it aside while his partner pulled her hands behind her back. Cold steel handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering, pointing, and glaring. The once feared HOA president now looked small, disheveled, and utterly powerless. Ethan's rescue. Paramedics rushed past Karen toward Ethan, who lay sobbing in Claire's arms. His leg was badly swollen, bent at an unnatural angle. "Broken tibia, possible femur involvement," one paramedic muttered. "Get the splint." Ethan cried out as they worked, but Claire held his hand tightly, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here." Daniel hovered close, his fists clenched. He wanted to scream at Karen, to demand why she would risk a child's life over some HOA rule, but he forced himself to stay focused on Ethan. The paramedics stabilized Ethan, loaded him onto a stretcher, and lifted him into the ambulance. Ryan, scraped and bruised, was treated on the spot and comforted by his own parents, who had rushed over in their pajamas. As the ambulance doors closed, Claire climbed in beside her son. Daniel turned to follow, but not before locking eyes with Karen. "You could have killed him," he said, his voice trembling with fury. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came. Neighbors turned against her. As deputies led Karen toward the patrol car, the whispers among the neighbors grew louder. "Can you believe she did that? She's lost her damn mind. All over a treehouse. A child's treehouse." Mr. Jenkins, who had always tolerated Karen's antics in silence, finally shouted what everyone was thinking, "You're not a president, Karen. You're a menace." The crowd murmured in agreement. For years, Karen had controlled the community with fear, fines, warnings, and threats of legal action. But now, as she stood in handcuffs, the power she once wielded evaporated. In its place was disgust. The sheriff's warning. Deputy Morales, a tall man with a steady voice, leaned down to speak to Karen before placing her in the squad car. "You're under arrest for reckless endangerment and assault with a deadly weapon. You have the right to remain silent." Karen interrupted, her voice shrill. "Assault? I wasn't assaulting anyone. I was enforcing the rules. That treehouse was a violation." Morales stared at her, his expression grim. "Lady, you attacked a tree while 2 kids were inside it. You're lucky we're not dealing with a homicide right now." Karen gasped, her face paling. No, that's not fair. They knew it was against the bylaws. I warned them." Her pleas fell on deaf ears. Morales finished reading her rights, then guided her firmly into the back of the squad car. The hospital. Meanwhile, at the county hospital, doctors examined Ethan. X-rays revealed a fractured tibia, torn ligaments, and deep bruising. He would need surgery and weeks in a cast. Claire sat by his bedside, stroking his hair while Daniel paced the hallway, consumed with anger and helplessness. When the doctor assured them Ethan would recover with time and physical therapy, relief washed over the Millers, but it was mixed with outrage. How could anyone do this to a child? Claire whispered. Daniel's voice was steel. She's going to pay for this. News breaks. By morning, the story had already hit the local news. HOA president arrested after cutting down treehouse, injuring child. The article spread quickly across social media, sparking outrage far beyond Willow Creek. People were stunned that a neighborhood dispute could escalate into such violence. Comments poured in. This is why HOAs have too much power. She should never see daylight again. Poor kid. I hope he recovers fast. Within hours, reporters began knocking on doors in the neighborhood, eager to interview witnesses. Karen's interrogation. At the county jail, Karen sat in an interrogation room, pale and shaking. Two detectives entered, their expressions hard. Mrs. Whitfield, do you understand the seriousness of your actions? Detective Harris asked. Karen's voice cracked. I was just enforcing the HOA bylaws. They were in violation. Detective Harris slammed his folder shut. You nearly killed 2 children over a treehouse. That's not enforcement, that's assault with a deadly weapon. Tears welled in Karen's eyes. For the first time, doubt pierced her self-righteous armor. But I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt, she whispered. Harris leaned forward. Intent doesn't matter. Actions do. And your actions left a 9-year-old boy in the hospital. Charges filed. The district attorney wasted no time. Karen was formally charged with felony assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment of a child, criminal mischief. Her bail was set high, and her HOA title was immediately suspended pending investigation. The HOA board, terrified of being dragged down with her, quickly distanced themselves. At an emergency meeting, they voted to strip her of her position entirely. She acted on her own, one board member told reporters. The HOA never authorized her to take such action. But the damage was done. Karen's obsession with control had destroyed her reputation, her authority, and possibly her future. The community unites. Ironically, the incident that had divided the neighborhood for weeks now brought them together. Neighbors rallied around the Millers, bringing meals, cards, and toys for Ethan while he recovered. Ryan's parents organized a fundraiser to cover medical bills, and local carpenters volunteered to rebuild a safer, sturdier treehouse once Ethan healed. Daniel, though grateful, remained haunted by the image of his son lying broken on the grass. None of this should have happened, he told a reporter. All because one woman thought rules mattered more than a child's safety. Karen's isolation. Back in her cell, Karen sat alone, replaying the events in her mind. She remembered the pride she felt as HOA president, the certainty that she was preserving order. Now, all she had left were the echoes of a chainsaw in her ears and the knowledge that the community she ruled despised her. Her only visitors were her lawyer and her husband George, who came once, looking more weary than angry. I told you to leave it alone, he said quietly through the glass. Karen lowered her eyes, tears spilling onto her hands. For the first time in years, she had nothing to say. The trial of Karen Whitfield became the biggest story Willow Creek had ever seen. News vans parked outside the courthouse, reporters with microphones swarmed the steps, and residents packed the gallery, just to watch the downfall of their once untouchable HOA president. Karen entered the courtroom wearing a drab orange jumpsuit, her hair no longer perfectly styled, her expression hollow. The woman who once strutted around with a clipboard now shuffled like a prisoner awaiting her fate. Ethan's family sat together in the front row. Claire held her son's hand, his leg still in a cast, while Daniel stared at Karen with a mix of anger and pity. Ethan, though still young, understood more than his parents realized. He whispered, "Dad, why did she hate the treehouse so much?" Daniel squeezed his shoulder. "Some people care more about rules than what's right, son. And when they forget what matters, they hurt others." The prosecution. The district attorney wasted no time painting a clear picture for the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about a simple neighborhood dispute. This is about an adult woman who, in her obsession with control, wielded a deadly weapon, a chainsaw, and deliberately cut down a tree while 2 children were inside a structure attached to it. Her actions were not only reckless, they were criminal." Photos of the wreckage, Ethan's medical reports, and testimony from witnesses like Mr. Jenkins and Ryan's parents were presented. One neighbor testified, "I watched her cut into that tree like she was chopping firewood. She didn't care who was inside. It was terrifying." The jury flinched at the photos of Ethan's broken leg, the screws and pins shown on the x-rays. Karen's defense. Her lawyer argued that Karen had no malicious intent, and believed she was enforcing bylaws for the safety of the community. They tried to frame it as a tragic misunderstanding. But Karen couldn't help herself. When she took the stand, she launched into a rant. "I gave them warnings. I told them it was against the rules. If one family ignores the bylaws, then everyone will think they can. That treehouse was a symbol of chaos." "Mrs. Whitfield," the judge cut in sharply. "You are not here to defend the bylaws. You are here to answer for endangering children." Karen faltered, her words unraveling as the jury watched with stony faces. The verdict. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Guilty. Karen was convicted of felony assault, with a deadly weapon, and reckless endangerment of a child. She was sentenced to 6 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 4. The courtroom buzzed with relief. For the Millers, it wasn't triumph, it was closure. Claire hugged Ethan tightly, tears streaming down her face. "It's over, sweetheart. She can't hurt you anymore." Karen, meanwhile, was led out of the courtroom in chains, her eyes vacant. The woman who once believed she ruled Willow Creek now had no authority, no allies, and no future in the community she tried to control. Ethan's recovery. The months that followed were difficult, but Ethan proved resilient. His leg healed slowly, with physical therapy sessions helping him regain strength. The scars, both physical and emotional, remained, but so did his spirit. One spring afternoon, neighbors gathered in the Millers' backyard. Local carpenters, volunteers, and even the sheriff himself came to help rebuild a new treehouse. This one was sturdier, safer, and filled with thoughtful touches, railings, reinforced beams, and even a small plaque that read, "For Ethan, a place to dream." When Ethan climbed the ladder for the first time, his smile returned. "It's even better than before," he said proudly. For Daniel and Claire, it was more than just a treehouse, it was a symbol of resilience, proof that their son's childhood couldn't be stolen by fear. The neighborhood transformed. Karen's downfall had ripple effects. Without her iron grip, the HOA softened. The board rewrote rules, focusing on community safety rather than cosmetic control. Block parties returned, neighbors felt freer to express themselves, and a sense of unity grew where division had once festered. At one meeting, Mr. Jenkins raised his hand and said, "Let's remember, we live here, not because of the rules, but because of each other." Let's make this neighborhood about community, not control. The motion passed with unanimous applause. Karen's fate. In prison, Karen faded from relevance. Letters to the HOA demanding reinstatement went unanswered. George eventually filed for divorce, unable to reconcile with the choices that had destroyed their lives. Other inmates mocked her when they learned what she was in for. "You went to prison for a treehouse," one laughed. Karen didn't respond. For the first time in her life, Karen had no one to boss around, no rules to enforce. Only silence and regret. The legacy. Years later, Ethan would look back on that summer with mixed emotions. He would remember the pain, the fear, the long nights in a hospital bed. But he would also remember the kindness of neighbors, the love of his parents, and the triumph of climbing back into a new treehouse rebuilt in hope. The story of Karen Whitfield became a cautionary tale in Willow Creek. Parents told their children about the night the HOA president went too far, reminding them of the importance of compassion over control. And every time someone passed the miller's oak tree, now scarred, but still standing, they saw not just wooden branches, but a reminder that community is built not by rules, but by people who care for one another. Epilogue. On a bright summer morning, Ethan stood in his rebuilt treehouse, looking out over the neighborhood. His cast was gone, his limp barely noticeable now. "Dad," he said quietly, "I think I'm not scared anymore." Daniel smiled from below. "That's because you're stronger than she ever was." And with that, Ethan waved to his friends arriving for another day of play. Laughter filled the air once more, louder, freer, and brighter than ever before. The storm had passed. Willow Creek had healed. And the little boy with the treehouse had won back his childhood.